I don't think the claim that blacks are victimized by mass incarceration has nearly the weight that it would have had 10 years ago. And I think the concern about violent crime in places like Chicago and the African American community's burden from that crime, as well as responsibility of those members of the community who are committing those crimes, is a different kind of conversation. And I think we're going to continue to move in that direction. You can't any longer dismiss and cancel from the conversation somebody for questioning some of these verities. I would give greater weight to the distinguished degree of an African American if I know that it has been earned under dispensation, which doesn't practice preference. That's one kind of subtle effect that I wonder if one, in assessing the effects, the consequences of eliminating affirmative action, whether the scholarship will attend to that. Maybe I should run for office, John.
Don't. If you run for office, all that is sitting in rooms talking to people about taxes. That is all it would be.
Hey there, John McWhorter. How are you?
Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I am doing very well in my new podcast studio, John, in the basement of my home.
Is that where you are?
That's where I am. It's not yet
nice.
fully decorated. Some of the pictures are on the floor rather than on the wall. You might recognize this one, which is that famous photo of Louis Armstrong and company. And
I saw that, yeah.
We're getting there. We're getting to where you can come and visit and we can do a live in-person if you've got a weekend to spare and you want to come up to Providence and hang out,
And then we would have a room. We could make a professional recording.
So This is our inaugural conversation in which I am making use of this new facility. Well lit,
so
multiple cameras, multiple boom microphones. We're professional down here, John.
This is going to be your real thing now. Not that it wasn't before, but this is it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. But let me introduce us, Glenn Loury, The Glenn Show. You've tuned into The Glenn Show with John McWhorter. I teach at Brown University. He teaches at Columbia University. I'm a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, which sponsors The Glenn Show. I'm very grateful for that. And we are back. John and I, we talk every other week here at The Glenn Show. And we're on this week. Hey, John.
Hey, Glenn. What's up?
So, yeah. You were about to introduce the fact that this is my last year teaching in Brown University. I'm retiring officially at the end of the 24-25 academic year. And a bit of nostalgia attends that inevitability. I had to tell my students, whom I saw for the first time last week, that this is my last year teaching. So they were lucky. And I'm grateful. But it's my 49th year of college teaching. I started in 1976. Yeah, that's longer than some of the parents of my students have been alive.
That's the point it gets at, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about the whole thing. But you're right. What am I going to do? And the Glenn Show is one of the things I'm going to continue doing with enthusiasm. And, I don't have a plan. And that's really kind of outrageous that I would enter into such a dramatic life change circumstance and not have a plan. I don't have a plan. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to be spending my time.
That I hear you on that because, I don't know, my real makeup was always that the thing that I found to be the most gratifying work, where I really felt the most like myself, was writing academic papers and books. I gradually learned that for quite understandable reasons, nobody reads the academic books. And then with the papers, I've pulled away lately because the field of Creole studies has become something I don't recognize. It's been completely taken over by hard left ideology over empiricism and curiosity. And so I no longer feel at home there. It's not that I've been chased out, but it's not the world I entered. And so then you do your pop books, and that is gratifying, but it's not as hard as writing the academic articles. Then I always, teaching is important. And then there's the media. For me, it was always, there was a time when I resisted doing this new thing called podcasting because I said, I don't want to just talk. I want to at least write it down. I want to write an editorial. I don't want to just say it. But then I gradually realized that the ecology had changed so much that was pulling myself out of the game. So I've gotten used to it. I love doing this with you, and I do my Lexicon Valley podcast. But there's part of me that always thinks that I'm phoning it in, and this is not false humility. I always feel like the real thing was sitting there and typing out, very carefully worked out reasoning based on something that I worked hard to learn a whole lot about. And I would worry if all there was the podcasting. And I know there are a great many people, brilliant people, who podcast and media only. You can be that person. But it wouldn't satisfy me. I wonder if it'll satisfy you. And maybe we're at different phases of life, and so I'm overthinking it. What do you think?
Well, first, I think you put your finger on something important in distinguishing between the academic and the popular. And to the extent that the popular feeds on the academic, that is, not only are you writing, but you're studying and reading and acquiring mastery over a body of knowledge. And that can inform, it can undergird your popular commentary. Your popular commentary can be more serious and wiser in virtue of its drawing on the wealth of wisdom and knowledge that you've acquired as a serious academic. I mean, that's not the only way to, I think, be a useful popular commentator. Not everybody has to take the academic route. I can remember having this conversation with Coleman, the young Coleman Hughes, about whether it's worth his time to pursue a PhD or something like that. And, there are pros and there are cons to it. He's made the choices that he's made. He's not taking an academic path. He's doing well. He's worth listening to, I think. But, there is a complementarity between those things. I think I stopped writing serious papers a while ago. I'm sorry to have to confess. The last publication I had in a top 5 refereed economics journal came out in 2014. I've written smaller papers with graduate students that have gotten published, but not in the American Economic Review in the intervening years. But more and more, it's been commentary of one sort or another, editorials of one sort or another, my writing. The memoir, which came out earlier this year and which was years in the making. So I am not in the game in the same way, in the game of here's the frontier in my field. Here are the major contributors. Here are the problems that they're working on. Do I have anything to say to them about that? That's been a while. I stopped teaching graduate students 5 years ago.
On purpose?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a department where I'm an economic theorist by day and a podcaster by night. And in my day job, we have a PhD program, and I would be teaching in the core required first or second year part of the PhD program, where the students are learning economic theory at a high level, technically precise representations of the body of knowledge, which is microeconomic theory. And we got a lot of theorists in the department, like 8 of them, 8 of us. I am the senior person in terms of years. 49 years, So I can stay as long as I want to. I can stay in the corner office as long as I want to. I can stay teaching the graduate students as long as I want to. And the longer I stay, the less opportunity there is for my younger colleagues to be able to get that kind of access to the best of our teaching opportunities. And so I decided voluntarily, long way of me saying I volunteered to step aside, just like I've voluntarily decided to accept a retirement package from Brown. Because a lot of seniority, big salary, corner office, taking up a lot of space, not nearly as productive as I used to be on the kinds of things that the department truly values, which is frontier enhancing research and the training of subsequently successful graduate students who go on and get good jobs. And they're constantly looking at the ratings. The Brown, is it's a top 15 department? Is it a top 20 department? And all that depends on the complex algorithm that computes how good your department is relative to others, and how you place your graduate students as a part of that, and how many articles you publish in the top 5 from your faculty as a part of that. Research grants that you get as a part of that. I haven't gotten a big National Science Foundation research grant in 15 years. So it's time for me to move on now. Moving on into an enhanced role as proprietor at the Glenn Show and commentator on matters far-flung in American politics and culture. You could do worse. You could do worse than that. You could do worse than having a lot of followers, having people think that your reaction to whatever the question might be, like subscribers to the Glenn Show who put in questions for us every month to respond, and who are waiting with bated breath to hear how we react to their provocations. You could do worse than being a person worth listening to in that register. So here's what I lament: the loss of the solidity of institutional grounding and support. Like, my salary would come from Brown every month without fail. My benefit package would come from Brown. Their contributions to my retirement account would come. I'd be professor at Brown University instead of professor emeritus, which is professor has been at Brown University. And getting out here in the world where you have to kind of, make your own way. There's no income from the podcast if people don't subscribe and pay for the privilege of hearing what you have to say. And there's no safety net. If things go south, they just went south. There's no guarantee. You can retire in place, not that you would ever do so, but a person with tenure at one of these places can retire in place, and nothing is going to happen except they won't get a big raise, and their colleagues will snicker behind their hands. And if you don't give a damn about that, you can go in and do whatever you want to do, and this is not a good thing. Tenure has a downside, and the incentive structure of tenure is not altogether inspiring. People do retire in place. A lot of us do. And I didn't want to do that. So okay. I gave him back their corner office. I packed up my books and moved into a little cubbyhole somewhere on campus. And some of my books I brought home, and some of them I gave away. And I gave up my sinecure, my guaranteed for life of a big salary and whatnot. And it's okay. But I don't know what I'm going to do, and that's the thing. I'm going to read. That's one thing I'm going to do. I have leisure. I'm going to I think take up some stuff. Like I've always wanted to know more about the French Revolution. Really, really. I want to know more about Enlightenment era philosophical, breakthroughs, and
Do you know?
I read a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know about the podcast "The Rest Is History" with Tom Holland and Dominic? I always forget his last name. These two erudite, charming British men who they've done like 500 episodes. They are one of them is an academic. One of them is an extremely rigorous nonfiction writer of nonfiction history books. And it's called The Rest Is History. It's a huge hit. They make a living off of it. It's becoming something that it's getting a kind of the power broker status, like quote unquote everybody listens to The Rest Is History. And they do deep dives into everything about history, such that if you wanted to learn about the French Revolution without reading an 850-page book, they've read all of those books, and they give it to you in a style that often has near academic detail, except they're fun. So I wanted to know about Napoleon, and I got it from them. I didn't know enough about World War I. I'm just now getting through this incredible. I've gone through 8 parts of it, eight episodes where they give you down to the mustaches people had. And I recommend them instead of the 850-page book. And I don't have any. Tom Holland and I have now done a couple of things together and are acquainted But I would say this even if that weren't true. This is not a plug. It's just heaping honest praise on something that I would praise even if I had discovered it independently. So yeah, the rest is history. I recommend it. I'm sure a great many people who are listening to this now already listen to The Rest is History.
Thanks for that suggestion. I'll definitely look into it. It sounds like my kind of thing.
Just saying.
Yeah. Leisure. What do you do when you have, at this stage of your life, when you have a lot of time on your hands? A lot of people find something to volunteer to contribute to. You know, I live here in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been living here since I came to Brown. I used to split my time between Providence and Brookline, Massachusetts when my wife, Linda, was still alive. She passed away in 2011. I came to Brown in 2005. But after she died, I decided there was no point in really commuting back and forth. Our kids were grown. And, so I sold our house in Brookline, Massachusetts and moved down here. And the fact of the matter is, I know almost nothing about this community, and I've been living here for 15 years. I mean, I don't know anything about the school system. I don't know anything about the local politics. I don't know anything about, the social organization of the different kinds of ethnic and communities that have sprung up. It's a
Yeah, you
town
don't
where
talk about that. That's true.
I could be living on the moon, you know? And we have this wonderful house that we've built here. We didn't build the house from the ground up, but we acquired
Wonderful.
it, and we've made massive investments in improving the house. And it's a sprawling estate. And my wife, Lawan, and our families, I have 5 children, 6 grandchildren. They come to visit, and her daughter and son-in-law come to visit. And we have friends, and we have a, social life here. But we don't really have a community life here. I don't even vote in the local elections because I have no idea who these people are. And I maybe almost could care less. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. But I do have a few friends who are more active. A couple that are, one's a lawyer who's been practicing in the local courts here, criminal and such, for decades, and his wife, who's a manager of a nonprofit that works with low-income kids and does good work. I'm thinking about maybe consulting with them and trying to see if there's not, some way that I can make a less high-flown but more practical contribution in the local community.
I know what you mean.
That's one thing. Run
Yeah,
for office. Maybe I should run for office, John.
don't. If you run for office, all that is sitting in rooms talking to people about taxes. That is all it would be. Why would you put yourself into that situation? It would be
And glad
grinding.
handing people to raise money at these fundraisers so I can run my campaign the next time around.
No. You wouldn't enjoy that. Not at all. I know what you mean about not knowing what you're going to do, because that's me on my sabbatical right now. And I like not knowing. Now I have plans. I'm going to teach myself how to play the clarinet, and I really am. I bought one.
Whoa.
And
That's major.
I think I have an in with the Boston Pops, and I've been obsessively researching this lost musical by Fats Waller from 1943. And I have gathered all the materials, and I would like to see it orchestrated, like made into something that an orchestra can play with professional singers singing the songs. And I have it all. And I happen to know somebody who might be able to make it work with the Boston Pops. That's going to be one.
Wow, John, that
project.
Is major.
And then, but it'll come and it'll go, and like everything else that I'm not going to sound that note, but it's going to come and it's going to go. And then I'm not going to write a book, not because I have any kind of resentment, but I don't have a real idea. What I really want to write is a book about Looney Tunes, but nobody would buy that. And so it's going to be my first year where I'm not planning a book in, I think, 25 at this point. I have a thing that I might be doing with Malcolm Gladwell that's an audio book, but that's going to be about musical theater and not about race and not about language. And I'm going to woodshed myself on linguistics, but I don't have a real plan, and I think I'm going to like it. I'm going to come out on the other end with a new sense of, where my feet sit on the ground. And we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting year. I'm not going to go out and do community work. I think I've been asked to present one of my books at a local bookstore. That's the furthest I think I'm going to go on that. But I know what you mean about getting to know your community. I have to know mine a little better because my kids are younger. But
kids, that's definitely a game changer. They tie you into the local scene in a very material way. Let me tell you about Ground News. It's the website and app that I use to stay fully informed and understand the media landscape. They gather articles from over 50,000 news sources around the world and help you break free from algorithms and echo chambers. Go to ground.news/Glenn Show to see how it works. My favorite Ground News feature is the blind spot feed. It shows you stories that are disproportionately reported by either the left or the right. It really highlights the disjointed nature of our political discourse today. For example, here's a story that's being covered only by right-leaning sources. Springfield, Ohio man reports Haitian migrants snatching geese out of park 2 weeks ago. And here's a story that right-leaning sources barely cover at all. Taylor Swift's endorsement of Harris drives nearly 338,000 users to government voting website. I wonder how the blind spot feed will look a week before the election and a week after. On Ground News, every news story comes with a breakdown of its coverage details. You can see how many news sources covered it, their bias distribution across the left, center, and right, how reliable these sources have been in the past, and who owns them. You can't get this type of news analysis anywhere else. Another useful feature is called My News Bias. It's a personal dashboard where you get insight into your own reading habits, your own media biases. Ground News gives you an entire toolkit that helps you see the machinery behind the news and propaganda. It really makes you appreciate how blurry the line between those two can be sometimes. My listeners who subscribe through my link will get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan, the same plan I use. So go to ground.news/Glenn Show. Click the link in the video description or scan the QR code to get Ground News for just $5 per month. I hope you'll join me in supporting an independent platform trying to bring facts, transparency, and trust back to the news. By the way, one of our listeners wants to know when your pronoun book is coming out.
That is sometime in April. And so, that one, I'm actually going to show somebody something. This is not something you see all the time if you're not in the biz. This is the final proofs, as we call it, of Pronoun Trouble.
Yeah, that's too close to the camera or something. We can't see, but we believe
like
you.
That? These are the proofs.
I can't actually read the title of it I can tell that there's text, but I can't actually read it.
And so they send it to you and you get one last chance to find the typos. You never find them all. But I am down to the last chapter of this one at that phase. By this phase, you're really weary of your book, but it'll be out for real in April. And so I say I'm not going to have anything to do, but in April and May, I'm going to be doing, lots of media for Pronoun Trouble. And, one thing will just kind of lead to another. We'll see. But not planning a book. It's weird.
Maybe I should be challenging myself with an intellectual project. I'm thinking about my friend, the historian David Kaiser, who has appeared a couple of times as a guest on the Glenn Show. And he's a good guy. He's a historian. And his most recent book is reading the history of the United States through major addresses of presidents. So he starts with George Washington and he marches through States of the Union and other such important oratory performances of American presidents. And he reads the speeches carefully and uses them as a launching point into an inquiry about the nature of the presidencies and how they accumulate in shaping the history of the country. But he's writing books. He's in retirement and he's taking on major questions like the one I just described briefly and executing on them. And maybe I should have a higher expectation for myself as an intellectual, not just as an academic economist writing for the profession, but as a person with decades of accumulated experience, wisdom, knowledge, turning his formidable, if I can say so, intellectual gifts to inquiry of ongoing relevance. I mean, uh, in the social sciences and the humanities, and I don't know.
I'm
One idea I had, just briefly, is I just completed a memoir. It was years in the making, and I've been reading memoir, amongst other things. I'm reading right now Sari Nusseibeh. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. Nusseibeih.
mhm.
He's a Palestinian philosopher. The book is called Once Upon a Country, and it's a memoir. And of his life, he's born in roughly the same time I think he was born in 1949. I was born in 1948. So he's lived through, the turmoil in Israel, Palestine. His family is very distinguished. I won't go on long about this, but a very distinguished, elite, uh, land owning, going back many generations in that culture. One of the leading families in the Palestinian Arab society for centuries. His father, when his father died, the king of Jordan and his bride came to the hospital room and knelt at the bedside to express their regrets and their grievance at his imminent demise. He was the father of a very prominent political intellectual leader amongst the Palestinian Arab population going back into the early part of the 20th century. Um, so I'm reading this guy's, I say this apropos of nothing other than there are a lot of such books that I think I want to read. And, maybe we can read some of them together. Maybe we could decide that there's a book that is really interesting and important and stimulating, and we could take it up and then base a couple of our conversations around discussing the
I'll
book.
throw one out.
Yeah.
How about my friend David Greenberg has I don't know if you do biography. I know a lot of people don't like them, but new biography of John Lewis. Haven't you always wanted to know a
Oh,
little more about him? And that's
oh,
coming out in about 5 minutes, and we could both read that.
oh. I'm for that. I
Why
think
not?
John Lewis is a very important figure, and he's becoming iconic. The John Lewis Act is what the Democrats have given as the name for this voting bill. uh, Good Trouble, John
Mm-hmm.
Lewis of Good Trouble and of that generation, because he was with SNCC in the early period of the civil rights movement, and he was a principal in the March on Washington and all of that. And, he served for decades with distinction as a member of the House of Representatives and
They're
senior
two.
figure.
They're two for some reason coming out at the same time. Not the
Ah,
one that's not by David Greenberg. No offense to the other person, but David has been telling me about this for years, and so I feel like I owe it to him to read that one. But yeah,
well,
yeah,
let's put that on our agenda going forward. I'm for that.
okay.
And things like that, just continue to keep your mind active and stay engaged and grow. Continue to grow. Don't just
That's what I'm
coast.
trying to do linguistically. I'm trying to learn some new ways of thinking within my own field that will stimulate me to have some new ideas. It really used to keep me going that I had ideas I wanted to share with the academic world as well as the public. And I want to share that way again with an audience within linguistics that is willing to listen. And that means I just have to move elsewhere. And I'm thinking at 58, I still have the capacity. And I'm going to read very different things than what I used to read. And I'm waiting for that light bulb to go off. Lord forbid it doesn't go off like it would have when I was 25. But I am hoping that it that it goes off because I want to share stuff. I want to have I want the novelty. I remember how that felt. And I'm on fire with an idea. I want that again. I haven't had that for 5 years. I want to get it back. So we'll see.
So here we are with another academic year beginning. It's in still September. Kids are coming back to college campuses. Courses are starting up. You are on sabbatical, and I am in my last year of teaching, and we're Black. And affirmative action was
That
stricken
was
by the
good.
Supreme Court. I'm going to segue somehow or another to the affirmative action theme, which is what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the fact that colleges are beginning to report. MIT had a statement that came out. Brown University had one that came out. I don't know about other people because the admissions statistics are in. Who's in the class of, what would it be, 2028? Now coming into as first year students at the elite colleges. And the numbers for African Americans are down in virtue of the fact that the Supreme Court's decision has changed the legal landscape for racial preferences. And I don't know about you. I've got mixed feelings about that. I wish the numbers weren't down. On the other hand, I'm actually glad that the Supreme Court decided the way that it did. And I'm aware of the fact that that decision has implications. And I think those implications present challenges to us. But how do you feel about it?
We knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
We've seen that this was going to happen because this is just a replay of what happened in California in the mid 1990s. And they're just two basic questions. If we're concerned with the fate of students who otherwise would have been admitted but now weren't to those top flight schools, what's happened to them? And I remember the rhetoric back in the 90s that was implying that they weren't going to go to college at all, that there was a general kind of segregation happening, which by implication was about the whole world of education. And I remember one time, I don't know if I've said it on this show before, but if I did, it was a long time ago. Some young Black filmmakers at Berkeley in the mid 90s grabbed me out of a crowd. They saw me walking by and they said, "You look like somebody who could play this person in our film." And what they meant was that I looked like I was kind of proper and starchy. I'll take it. I am. And they said, "Our film, it's a short film. It's going to be about this boy who wants to get into Berkeley. But how's it go? He wants to get into Berkeley, but Berkeley rejects him because now there are no longer racial preferences. And so he kills himself because he was just so upset that he couldn't get into Berkeley, as if there was nowhere else that he could get in." And, that's not really the way it goes. If we're concerned about those students, then presumably they went to college somewhere else. Very few of them went to colleges we would not want anybody to go to. I'm not sure what kind of college that would be, but they're at esteemed universities, maybe not in that top 30 or 40, but is that really going to affect their life trajectory so much? And the answer, quite simply, is no. Now, are we concerned about what the issue is on the campuses themselves now that there are somewhat fewer Black students and Latino students there? And the question is, what? Okay, there's somewhat less of what's called diversity, and that will have the effect of what? And I think we know this, especially after 2020. Is it that Black students contribute these really precious views in class about what oppression and what inequality is like? But let's face it, it's at the point where every second student of any shade, including plaid on a college campus, knows all about that and is eager to demonstrate that they know about those things in order to show that they're good people. You no longer need the Black student to raise their hand in the back of the class and talk about rates of people in prison, et cetera. And so, is it just that socially there's supposed to be a certain amount of diversity? It has to be that we're represented at 13%, for example, because then you're saying that your white daughter, your white daughter Valerie, she needs a certain amount of diversity so that she can be comfortable working with different kinds of people. Well, my question is, okay, what is it about Black people that would make her uncomfortable? What is it that she has to learn? And why does it have to be that we have to be 13% in order for Valerie to get that lesson? Her name is no longer Valerie, but I can't think of anything else. And so that. Now you see all the buzzwords that people are using. These poor administrators, they can't help it. They cannot speak real English about this. They have to get up there and spout this word salad. But the truth is, I don't see what the tragedy is, because the students who didn't get in are doing just fine. And the campuses themselves are not suddenly these lily white and lily Asian campuses. Campuses are just fine. A person who didn't know about any of this, a person who didn't know about these percentage differences, might not, and in fact would not even notice anything different about the incoming class. It's not as if there are no brown students at all, and it's not as if it's down to just 3. It's just like at Berkeley. And I would hope that we could take a lesson from that. And to tell the truth, why don't people have any faith? You see something like this, say at MIT, fewer black students, and you think, well, this just isn't right. We have to let the black students in according to an altered standard, because otherwise this is the best it's going to be. Hey, who says? How about looking at those rates and making a sincere effort, and not MIT making recruitment efforts? I'm sure they've done all they can. But from the other end, I hate to say it, but within the whole culture, the idea being, what can we do to make it so that more of us get into MIT without having to need special favors? That's what I think most cultures would do, or just decide that they're interested in something other than getting into MIT. But the idea of insisting, yes, we can't, that for us, you must change the standards. No, this would look absurd to the civil rights leaders of even the recent past, and it's going to look absurder to the ones of the past coming very soon. We're just caught up in word salad, and it's hard to look beyond our own time. That's how I feel about it. I see no tragedy at all.
Okay. I can't say that I disagree with anything that you've just said. I think the first order point is that the effect of affirmative action is really only discernible in the most selective institutions. Most colleges and universities admit a vast majority of the people who apply because they're looking to fill the seats. I think what's the difference between Princeton and Rutgers? It's not trivial, especially in the most rarefied areas of study. But for most of the students, is it a life-altering event? Have I consigned somebody to failure if they don't get into Princeton and they end up at Rutgers? Is it something someone should contemplate suicide over because, well, Princeton is so desirable and Rutgers is so crummy? No, I don't think so. But there is this, and this pushes a little bit against the theme that you've introduced, which is there are portals into the upper echelon of American society, and places like Princeton and MIT are among the gateways into the super elite of the society, and a place like Rutgers or Rensselaer Polytechnic are less so.
But Glenn, are they? This is just a real question. Do we know that they are, or we assume that they are? Is this something studied that there's some significant difference?
I'm sure it has been studied. My colleague John Friedman, the economist here at Brown University, and his associates have a lot of data, and Raj Chetty, the guy at Harvard University, and those kind of people, and they study these kind of things. I'm not, on top of the data to the extent that I could answer your question definitively. But my impression is, yes, that there is a bump. There's anecdotes. I mean, if I look at the law schools that were attended by justices who are sitting on the Supreme Court, they're all, Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. If I look at the people who are at the top of the business heap or whatnot, I don't know whether or not going to Ivy League institution is a big deal. I can understand your skepticism about that, but such is the impression in any case. The impression is these are gateways, and when our kids are not, Black kids are not represented in adequate number, what we regard to be adequate numbers in these gateway institutions, they are deprived of the opportunity of entering into the cadres of leadership in the society. And we're rationing access to the elites, and we need to, if we don't bring in enough students of color, that undermines the legitimacy of the elite institutions, and it's a question of justice understood in those terms. Now, I'm mumbling. I understand that I'm mumbling here. Please don't accuse me of word salad, because it's not an argument that I fully can fully embrace. And I wonder whether in the reaction here, the studies will pay attention to some of the more subtle questions. So, for example, when you lower standards, you change expectations. A person comes with a degree from an elite and selective place, and they're Black, and I know that that elite selective place is practicing affirmative action, I have a assessment of the quality of that person that looks different than it would look if I knew that that university was not practicing racially preferential affirmative action. I would give greater weight to the distinguished degree of an African American if I know that it has been earned under a dispensation which doesn't practice preference. That's one kind of subtle effect that I wonder if one, in assessing the effects, the consequences of eliminating affirmative action, whether the scholarship will attend to that. And there's a lot of stuff that's like that. So another one that I think about is, what about the historically Black colleges and universities? People talk about wanting to support them. Politicians brag about legislating money for them. Well, this Supreme Court has just bestowed a huge indirect beneficial endowment upon HBCUs, because the marginal African-American student who now doesn't anticipate getting admitted to a highly selective institution because of affirmative action, when making the decision about where to apply and where to matriculate, will be at the margin more encouraged to consider HBCU as a place. And I should think that the quality of the applicant pool at these institutions would be discernibly improved in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision. And that's a measurable outcome that I think scholars who are assessing, not just counting the numbers that have gone down at some places, but counting the numbers that have gone up at other places to the benefit of those places. It's another kind of subtle effect. I worry about grade inflation, to be honest with you. That is about what happens to the integrity of students' assessment in an environment where, because of the desire to get racial diversity, you have lowered the standards in recruiting Black students. And because the standards are lowered, the performance on average of those students is lower than it otherwise would have been. But assessing that performance candidly and honestly would expose, assessing the performance of all students candidly and honestly would expose the consequent disparity of performance by race amongst the students who are admitted under affirmative action, and therefore the incentive to blur the assessment in order not to expose that consequence of affirmative action is created. I mean, I can't prove this. This is a kind of thing that would require some carefully designed empirical inquiry but I speculate that it's a reasonable consequence to anticipate, and something that should attract the attention of people who are looking into this kind of thing.
You know, it's the first thing that you mentioned. It's such a no-brainer, really. And yet you're not supposed to bring it up because there's no good answer to it. And so much of the discussion of racial preferences is about politeness. But it's very simple. It's very simple. So often, Black students say, they think I got in because of affirmative action. Now, first of all, do you think you didn't? And what makes you think so? And what that person may be thinking, I've never asked one, but what they may be thinking is that affirmative action is based on disadvantage, that it's only poorer Black kids who got it because of affirmative action. That would be pardonable, but that would mean, why does everybody scream bloody murder when somebody like Richard Collenberg or me, or I presume you, says it would be better to base this on socioeconomics rather than melanin? Quite simply, it's not that anybody's evil, but that makes no sense. It makes no sense at all if students are inclined to think, well, it wasn't me who got in based on affirmative action too. If there is that policy, why are students so evil to start making those sorts of assumptions? It's perfectly rational to suppose if that's the policy, then there's a risk when I'm in a group with this Black student, or when I'm just socially interacting with this Black student, there's a possibility that they were not admitted for the same kinds of reasons that I was. And so many people would say, if that's how it feels to be a member of a race who are beneficiaries, so to speak, of racial preferences, then wouldn't one solution, just one possible solution, one possible thing that you might want to bring in, is eliminate this policy as quickly as possible. You can imagine A Korean immigrant grandmother saying in Korean, there's a family discussing who's getting into what schools. Her saying, well, what about the Black students? If they have this different standard for the Black students, then doesn't that mean everybody's going to think that they're not as good? What would we say to grandma? Why is grandma so wrong? Why is it that she's only asking that because she's an immigrant or she's elderly or she's naive? What are you supposed to say to grandma? Grandma is using pure logic. She's not wrong because she's Korean and she doesn't speak English and she's just saying it in somebody's kitchen. We are not supposed to use basic rationality in assessing this sort of thing. And then the other very quick thing is how commonly it is brandished that Black students don't like to talk about things Black in class. No Black student wants to be representative that way. You're always thinking, suppose I don't say it right. Suppose people don't want to hear it. Suppose I had a bad night last night. Suppose I don't want to be bothered. Black students don't like representing diversity in the classroom. And yet, whole admissions policy is based on an idea that you need Black students on campus to represent those sorts of views. Once again, it makes no blessed sense. Now, the hard right these days, or the MAGA right or whatever, often will say there's a conspiracy, they're evil, they're trying to take over the world. No, it's not that. That's not how human affairs usually work. It's simply that we are urged not to make sense with the larger view of battling whiteness and its power. It will not do. And that is what these new statistics are encouraging us to do. To be an enlightened American is to know that language. It's like you know how to greet people. It's like you know to ask your elderly great aunt whether she needs you to go get her another plate instead of expecting her to get up and go get the plate itself. Nobody tells you that after a while. Can I get you some food, Aunt Carolyn? Same thing. You learn that you are not supposed to present real answers to these very simple questions. It won't do. I can't stand it.
I have the sense we're living in an interesting period where the wheel is turning on the racial debate. I mean, the demise of affirmative action is one such indicator. The fiasco of the denouement of Black Lives Matter is another. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, in retrospect, it's very clear that that was a moral panic, that racial reckoning of 2020 after the killing of George Floyd and the culmination of a decade of protest about police violence and whatnot. The Democrats are running a prosecutor for president, and they're proud of it. Nobody's running around, no serious Democrat who wants to get elected in this country is running around raving a Black Lives Matter flag, unless they happen to have a safe constituency in St. Louis or somewhere. DEI is on the run. It's a rout. It's a rout. You just got through saying Black kids don't want to be identified as the beneficiaries of affirmative action. Well, how many people are having it asked openly and candidly, is that a DEI appointment, including people running for president of the United States? That's part of the discourse now. DEI, in the wake of the October 7th and the war in the Middle East and whatnot, the ideology of the diversity cadres in the sociology departments of various universities is up for critical examination. The conversation has completely changed around these issues. I don't think the claim that Blacks are victimized by mass incarceration has nearly the weight that it would have had 10 years ago. And I think the concern about violent crime in places like Chicago and the African-American community's burden from that crime, as well as responsibility of those members of the community who are committing those crimes, it's a different kind of conversation. And I think we're going to continue to move in that direction. You can't any longer dismiss and cancel from the conversation somebody for questioning some of these verities. And I think the reparations argument, for example, I mean, it's not going to go away. It's going to continue to, be raised and be pushed, but it's not going anywhere, in my humble opinion. We will see not going anywhere. So I think the wheel is turning. I think this affirmative action reaction is just part of a more general shift in the tenor of American policy. And if Trump wins this election, which you could do, that'll be another nail in the coffin.
I'm inclined to agree. I mean, even DEI, this is something that's gone by so quickly, it's easy not to notice it. I wasn't talking about DEI in 2019. I was calling it racial preferences and affirmative action, etc. DEI came in, and it wasn't a grand conspiracy. It's what happens in human affairs. It's cumulative. It's emergent. DEI was a euphemism that came in because people who espoused these preference policies knew that it was getting to the point that you were hitting such a sore spot that people were beginning to lose faith in the whole idea or were not capable of listening. This whole conversation we're having about DEI is really just a euphemism for what used to be called preferences. And yeah, you're right. It is very much on the ropes. I think that the fact that poor Claudine Gay had to step down, if it weren't on the ropes, she'd still be in. She would have waited for that to blow over. And the fact that she's Black and interesting and beleaguered by Christopher Rufo would have kept her in. But no, it didn't. That to me was the big moment. Kind of like, remember when Jesse Jackson was discovered to have had a love child? He had been sleeping with somebody while he was ministering to the Clintons during the Lewinsky business. If you think about it, that was a turning point with the reign of him and that kind of demagoguery. We never really heard from him in any significant way again after that happened. That was, I think, in 2001. And I have full sympathy for his medical condition now. I'm not trying to dump on him. And I was never a huge enemy of Jesse Jackson, but that was it. And I remember thinking at the time, this is important because the conversation is going to change. Nowadays, when people rail against Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, I try to gently say that's gone. Claudine Gay not being in that job meant something. That meant that, to me, that peak woke was over. And yeah, we're still in that moment. And it's going to take time for people to get used to the idea of Black people trying their best, having bad things happen to them that way because of the caprices of social history and our assumptions gradually changing. It's really going to blindside a lot of people, but it has to, if we're talking about real social justice. Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
John and I often talk about higher education on this podcast. Obviously, that's the universe we both inhabit. And why not? It's a topic that has moved front and center of late at both the state and national level. Attacks on free speech, lack of viewpoint diversity on campus, soaring tuition, the erosion of academic standards. And we all saw the disturbing images of encampments, occupations, and disruptions on campuses last spring. Universities are bracing for more of the same as students return this fall. America's higher education system is in crisis. So, with all that's going on, to whom can one turn as a trusted resource of all issues related to higher ed reform? The American Council of Trustees and Alumni is one source we want to strongly recommend as a credible and respected voice on all these issues. We're pleased to have ACTA sponsoring this episode. Some of ACTA's latest work is focused on helping university leadership address campus unrest and the inherent risk of bowing to pressure to boycott and divest from Israel. And as it has for decades, ACTA is also, once again, calling for a national civic education revival in America. In partnership with College Pulse, ACTA has surveyed 3,000 college students, exposing serious knowledge deficits about rudimentary American history and civics. Not surprising, only 19% of American colleges require a course in American history to graduate. If you care deeply about these issues, as John and I do, you really must know more about the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. Start by looking them up on the web at goacta.org. That's goacta.org. And follow them on Twitter and Facebook.
Race conversation is changing. Oh, did you hear about Robin DiAngelo?
No, I didn't hear about Robin DiAngelo. What gossip do you have to share with me about Robin DiAngelo?
Pure gossip. And, the prelude to it actually is that, Rufo, etc.
Don't tell me she plagiarized something in
And then going after all these DEI people, finding all of this, rampant plagiarism.
This is Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute. He writes in City Journal, and who was a major exposer of the plagiarism of Claudine Gay and so forth. But just in case people don't know who Rufo is, but go ahead.
Right. And they exposed others. And unfortunately, they exposed like 3 more Black women with PhDs in DEI who've done the same thing. It seems to be rather endemic in the field. Well, now it's DiAngelo. Apparently, DiAngelo's dissertation of 2001 is just dripping with passages just lifted from other people shamelessly. And once again, it's not the ideas. It's basically in her lit review, in her acknowledging what other people said. Her modus operandi was just to, lift what they said and change an adverb or something like that. And not just once or twice, but it's just dripping with it. And most of the people who she plagiarized are people of color. And so, she has this idea that all people of color must be treated as these Dresden China figures. But look what she did when she got bored writing her dissertation and didn't feel like composing text. And so, it made the news for about 36 hours, and then it went away. But Robin DiAngelo is many things. She is not Black. And now it turns out that she is not immune from these sorts of charges. Just wanted to say, and it's a little small of me, but because the media, the mainstream media being the way it is, haven't heard much about it, I just thought I'd say it here so people knew that there is, that blotch upon her record. Not to say that there aren't any on mine, but mine are not about plagiarism. So, that.
I doubt that she cares very much. I mean, she's already gone to the bank. I mean, I have no idea how much money she's made with this white fragility shtick that she's been selling for a decade. It's not like she has an academic reputation to protect.
She doesn't have anything to worry about, no.
Yeah,
but
I shouldn't think so. Now, earlier, before we started recording, you were talking to me about a biracial literary figure who you thought was worth discussing. Who is that again?
Do you mean Danzy Senna?
Yeah, Danzy Senna.
Fiction writer. Yeah.
So what's up with her?
She is a very celebrated mixed Black and white writer who's written several novels. I want to say 4, but I'm not great on fiction, so maybe that's not all of them. But I think 4 novels about the challenges she sees in being somebody who's not just biracial, but she specifies mixed Black and white. And she's interesting because she says that she is not interested in the old tragic mulatto trope. So the idea is not that people who are mixed Black and white, as we used to call it, are tragic figures. And yet she's written novels about just the challenges in it. She thinks of it as a thing, as a big deal that you're half white and you're half Black, that it's something you have to navigate, that society looks at you differently than what you feel like you are inside, etc. And she's getting major coverage for her latest book. She actually is the spouse of Percival Everett of American fiction fame, and then the James book lately, and
which I just finished, and I think it's brilliant. I think James is brilliant.
It's just it's interesting. I have been bemused by 2 things in the media this week: her work and her perspectives and her interviews, and also Justice Jackson's autobiography, which I have skimmed. I haven't read it, but I have skimmed it. And it's interesting. Both of them are people who are more or less contemporaries of mine. They've grown up, in the time that I grew up in. Black like me, Danzy identifies as Black, not as mixed, but Black like me in my environments. Both of them went through Stanford. I was at Stanford as a grad student and was very ensconced in the community. I knew the scene. And both of them make me wonder what's wrong with me in a way. And I really do think that there's something I'm missing. It's the sort of thing that made me first write Losing the Race. Why am I different? Both of them remind me that on that campus at that time, it was default for Black students to think of it as a racist campus and to think of racist experiences as staples of their lives. And I didn't feel it, and I started investigating because I was frustrated because it made it hard sometimes to make connections. And Justice Jackson's autobiography is wonderful in all sorts of ways, but I couldn't help getting a feeling it almost sounds like she's writing about a world 25 years earlier than when she grew up. And with Danzy Senna, the way she talks about these issues, I think, yes, except I recognize all this from when I was 17, but it doesn't seem like that's what the world is like now.
John, where did Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson go to college?
She went to, not Stanford, she went to Harvard, didn't she? She's a Harvard student.
That's what I'm asking. I wasn't sure. I thought so, though. Harvard College and Harvard Law, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, I had that mixed up, but similar environments.
But her report is that she was subject to racism and it was an oppressive experience as a Black woman to be there.
She doesn't put it in that latter way, but she, indulged in a certain amount of protest against racism at Harvard at the time. And you hear that from people. Roxane Gay, the author, Black woman author, talks about Yale in the same way during the same period, roughly, but a little bit later. And I understand that things happen, but the question is how often and what sorts of things are they? And I was just struck because we're talking about really smart, sensitive people. And I was thinking, there it goes again. I didn't feel that way. Is it because I couldn't see it? Is it because I didn't want to know it? Or is there something about them, but there's so many more of them than there are of me? And once again, with both of them, I feel that scrim curtain. I feel like that's how it felt to you, because I was deeply frustrated in not understanding it based on what I thought of as passing incidents of goofy bias for the most part, or assumptions people may have made, which I made it my business to dispel now and then. So that is what struck me. You should listen to some of the interviews in both of the cases, actually.
Yeah, I will do. I'm thinking about something that Michelle Obama, who I was also a part of your generation.
Right.
It was a Princeton undergraduate, Harvard Law. During her speech at the DNC last month, she used the phrase, the affirmative action of generational wealth. She was saying that Blacks didn't have the affirmative action of generational wealth. And when she said it, I thought about, what was it? It was probably sometime in the 1990s when she was on Princeton's campus, or
no, she and I are very close. 80s, yeah, close in age,
mid 80s. And there were a lot of wealthy people. That generational wealth undoubtedly was easy to find around Princeton, but the Blacks who were there weren't the products of generational wealth. They were the products of affirmative action. And affirmative action was a counterpoint to generational wealth. It was our generational wealth. It was leveling the playing field for those who didn't have generational wealth. Of course, Sasha and Molly are going to have generational wealth. Those are the daughters of the Obamas. They are now a part of the inner sanctum of the elite in the old-fashioned way. We were talking about affirmative action earlier, and the idea that it is a counter to the absence of the elite generational wealth inside the country club status. It's another way for Blacks to get inside the country club, came to mind. And I just thought I'd say that before we part company here.
Yeah. I've just been kind of musing on it again, because I kind of thought I had solved the problem for my own purposes inside. But I always just like to try to recheck myself. What was I missing? Was I in denial? Was I too into my hobbies to understand? But yeah, both of those people's current work deserves attention. Just saying that.
Another parting thought, it strikes me that the fight over how multiracial, biracial, mixed racial, whatever you want to say it, however you want to say it, the fight over the interpretation of that status, I think of Thomas Chatterton Williams, whose father is Black and his mother is white. I don't know about Danzy Senna, which parent, father is Black, mother is white.
Mm-hmm.
But I gathered that they have very, very different I mean, Thomas' self-portrait in black and white, overcoming race. What's the title of that book?
That I don't have it in my head, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he's looking at his daughters and saying, in effect, are they really black? I mean, my wife is white, my mother is white. How long are we going to keep this one drop rule thing going? And I wonder how that contrasts with this
what's
other
interesting
person's.
is that Danzy Senna claims, I think it's in the New Yorker when she's interviewed, that she and Thomas were seated next to each other at some event not long ago, and that Thomas told her that she was recapitulating the one drop rule in considering herself black. I should mention, from what I've seen on the Twitter, that Thomas says that never happened. Now, I don't think that they were not at the same event together. There's no way the New Yorker would make that up. But he says that conversation didn't happen. And I'm not sure was Danzy Senna misinterpreting what he said? Does Thomas not know that that's what he said? Or is it that Danzy Senna has read Thomas saying that and then kind of blended it into maybe Thomas saying? So I really don't know. But Thomas is especially disappointed, actually, that the New Yorker mentioned him as Thomas Chatterton Williams, senior fellow at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute. And so, in other words, they're labeling him a conservative. And I think we both know that doesn't fit him. He's got like 18 affiliations. One of them is that he's a professor at Bard. He's a contributing editor at The Atlantic. He's not a member of the right wing in any sense. But
not close.
The New Yorker makes it seem like he's this one card-carrying conservative, and two, told her that she was recapitulating antebellum notions of race. I'm just saying that he has pushed back against that particular version of things. And I was not at this event. I'm not sure, but yeah, that.
Well, it's ironic. It's ironic. This Percival Everett would appreciate this. That because the one drop rule madness plays a major role lurking behind the scenes in the novel James. And I won't go further because I don't want to. I want people to read this book. It's really, I think, a very noteworthy achievement. Very clever, very very intricate. I'll give one example. He has a character who's black. Well, kind of black. I mean, light-skinned black, who's a slave, who falls in with a troupe of vocalists of, a choir, and that performs in blackface. It's all white guys blackening their faces. This is pre-bellum, and performing Negro work songs and spirituals and things of this sort. And he falls in with them and through hook and by crook gets recruited amongst their number because he has a good voice. So he's a black guy pretending to be a white guy, pretending to be a black guy. They put blackface on him because if the audience were to discover that he was a real Negro, it would spoil the effect of the blackface performance, which is supposed to be us white people pretending to be these darkies in order to make fun out of their antics. And you would be putting one over on the audience if you had a real black person. But is he really black? I mean, so he's a black guy pretending to be a white guy, pretending to be a black guy. And it's, and there's a lot of stuff that's like that. And it's all kind of riffing on the madness of racial classification based upon the one drop rule.
Yeah, I'm sure Everett knows this, but black minstrels, who were very common, they always blacked up too. And so even if you were black and everybody knew you were black, in a way, you blacked up in order to be perceived as what white people thought of black people as being. And so you didn't just get up there with your black face. You put on the lips. That was the sickness of American entertainment for basically that whole century up to, frankly, like 1930. There were many black minstrels. If you got up there, even if you were your colorblind, you put that stuff on and you made your lips white, because what you were doing was not being a black person, but a black person as portrayed by a white person making fun of you. Yeah. And that was just standard. It was normal. Any white person you know from back then had probably seen that sort of show done and just thought of it as the way life was. It was like watching Jimmy Kimmel. It's just, yeah, it's weird. But yeah, just these issues of the one drop, etc. And I did a piece in the Times not long ago where I said I perceive black people as black when they've got the one drop. That's what I was taught. I was taught that with a certain first-lipped idea that you don't question it. I go back that far. But I said that I know intellectually that doesn't make sense, and we do need to start working past it, because we're just recapitulating the way Simon Legree, I'm still reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, Simon Legree felt. And so, yeah.
How do Dolly and Vanessa, that's your children's name, isn't it? How do they identify? They're biracial?
I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. We heard Danzy Senna on the radio the other day. And my children, their father is black, their mother is white. And my 12-year-old said, "She's talking about me, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And my daughter said, "It's not an issue anymore." She said she didn't understand. She said, "It's not hard. You're black, mommy is white. Almost everybody we know is mixed in some way. It's not something I've ever had to think about."
Wow.
And I said that, in the past, you had to think about it more. And I said that the past did not mean 150 years ago. I said, even when I was a kid, it was harder for the mixed kid than now. But I told her also, I think you're right about today. I said, I think you need to listen to her as somebody who's been around almost as long as I have, because you're right. It's not hard for you now. And frankly, this is where I'm going to get in trouble with certain people. I told her, it's not going to get hard for you later. Not in the lives that they're living in 2024 in the context that they live in. I told her she was right. But I told her also, don't listen to her in derision, because it's a matter of time frames, and she's a lot older than you. But yeah, that's what they thought. My 9-year-old agreed, but I'm not sure she has the context enough to fully understand. But they're right. And I'm sure they're going to feel the same way in 10 years, honestly.
We'll know that we have achieved the promised land when Dolly runs for president and it doesn't get remarked that she's quote unquote black. She's just taken to be an American person running for president.
I suspect it's coming. And if it isn't, fine with me, but I suspect it's coming. Yeah.
All right, everybody. That's a wrap for The Glenn Show with John McWhorter. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we will be responding to questions for the month of September. So feel free, if you are a paying subscriber, to submit questions at glennlowry.substack, and we will consider them when we take the Q&A. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you, Glenn.